I'm the Civil Society Data Officer, and I've worked with Superhighways on a few different things. I've presented at Impact Aloud before, but I also sit as part of the community engagement team at City Hall. So today I'm going to be sharing with you some examples of projects that we've done at City Hall where we've kind of used Londoners' stories, so gathered qualitative data and pulled insights and findings from them to decision making and policy making at City Hall. I've kind of the session's going to be sort of in 3 parts today, so I'm going to give a kind of bit of a presentation around like examples of these 2 programs that we've used, how we pulled insights and intelligence from Londoners' stories to inform decision making, to give you examples of how perhaps you can think about collecting qualitative data and translating that into sort of informative insights, and then I'm going to give you an opportunity to test out a kind of very basic but hopefully fun qualitative data analysis exercise using Jamboard. If you've not used Jamboard before, it's great, and hopefully this will inspire you to use it in other ways once you leave. And then I'm going to, I think it's really important to think about how we make those links between qualitative data insights and quantitative data and sort of give contextual, often people want facts and figures, and I'm going to talk you through how you can find some of that kind of contextual data on the London Data Store, which is if you don't know what the London Data Store is, it's one of our kind of platforms that City Hall owns, and it has over 900 data sets on about Londoners, with various different types of data on. And I know that Sorrel mentioned in the intro that we've done some work around collecting insights from Londoners and from civil society organisations throughout the pandemic. So I'll show you some of that data and how you perhaps can use that in your own work as well. There's going to be opportunities to ask me questions throughout. I'll come back to you after I sort of said something or set out one of the examples. So please feel free to pop questions in the chat, put your hand up, however you feel comfortable asking, please feel free, and I'll make sure to kind of check in on that as I go through. So where to begin? So I thought I'd give you just a quick overview. of the community engagement team. So our main aim at City Hall is to bridge the gap between Londoners and City Hall, with one of our main objectives being to amplify voices of London's diverse communities, especially communities who are often less heard in public policy and in organisations like City Hall. So we do this through a variety of ways, but ultimately the objective of all the projects that we do is to listen to Londoners' stories and pull key insights and extracts from these to feed into policy teams, so that policy teams have the voices of Londoners fed into their policy making. We're really keen, as I said, to do this in multiple different ways. The London Community Response Survey, which I mentioned before, was something that we launched in April. We were across the experiences of organisations, civil society organisations and their beneficiaries throughout the pandemic. A number of roundtables, so collected through meetings in the summer in particular, we focused on those disproportionately impacted by the coronavirus. We also host a number of networks and forums, so we're collecting a lot of insight and intel a lot of the time, often in sort of written form, recorded form. So our main goal is like, how do we then take all that great insight and knowledge that we gain from communities, organisations, and synthesize it into a way that policy teams will then respond to. So the 2 projects that I want to talk to you about today, I picked because I think they have methodology that you could use in your civil society organisations, adapt and adopt some of the techniques that we've used. And also the London community story in particular, which I'm going to talk about second, I think has some insights and creative attributes and outputs that perhaps you might find either insights in or inspiration from to use in your own work. So I'm going to jump into talking about the first of the two projects now. Once I cover the first project, I'll come to you if you have any clarification questions. But also on the last slide, I have the email addresses of my colleagues who led on these two programs, and they're more than happy for you to get in touch with them as well. So I'll remind you at the end that if you have any questions, after I share this first example, please do ask away. Okay, so can we all see the slide that says citizen-led engagement? Yes, excellent. So citizen-led engagement program is one of our, the past 2 years has been one of our flagship programs. The aims of which, it's a peer-led research program, and we've run it for two years, and we're in the process of designing its third iteration for, in line with the London's Recovery Board aims of sort of supporting London recover from the impact of coronavirus. But essentially the aims of the programme are to strengthen the voice of communities who are underrepresented in public policy, inform insights into communities who do not currently have a voice in City Hall, and inform and build capacity within the organisations who the grantees. So essentially, grants are given to community organisations who design a peer-led research programme into their specific community on a particular issue which is pertinent to them at the time. We, as part of the grant, organisations are giving training in research practices, supporting in designing their research questions, and once they've had this design and they co-produce their research questions with City Hall teams, so that could be the policy team, that could be the engagement team, they then go out and recruit peer researchers, train their peer researchers who then conduct that research, analyse and feedback their findings. Because this programme is designed by and for very diverse communities, this means the focus, methods and outputs really vary, and we're not prescriptive in how they feedback those insights to us. So although ultimately they're all peer-led and they're trying to respond to a specific research question, we have a variety of different insights, final reports shared back with us. So I'll just give you a few examples of the project so you can get a sense of kind of what I mean by that, in that we get a variety of different things fed back. Right, I'm not on the right page. So some of the examples. So I've got 3 examples here. So the Young Europeans organisation, who work, I think they're sort of an arm of the New Europeans programme, or 3 million, which is around supporting EU citizens in the UK. So Young Europeans wanted to research the impact of Brexit on young European Londoners. And as I said, they all use different research methods and different ways in how they share their insights with communities in City Hall. So the Young Europeans, their actual programme was being led by a PhD student, so she had the skills to analyse and produce a relatively academic report. But in order to ensure that those insights could be interpreted and used by the communities, by the peer researchers who had done the work, she also used the key themes which came out of her analysis to guide a short documentary that they created, which sort of was trying to express and show the main insights and themes that they had collected in that research. And they were then able to also use the research to launch a discussion with MPs around the experiences of young Londoners with regards to knowledge around settled status and also participation. In contrast, the Traveller Movement conducted their research with younger people, so they were looking at the barriers to education for GRT communities. And because of sort of cultural sensitivities, they had to adapt the training that we offered, and also they conducted their surveys via one-to-one interviews, and they fed their feedback back to our education and youth team, which has then informed sort of dialogue around what more could be done to support traveller communities. And then in a completely different sort of focus and with a completely different research question, UPress explored the impact of serious youth violence on BAME communities, and they did this through creative workshops and allowing young people to come along and kind of express their views and their experiences of serious youth violence in a very sort of creative way, and from that they pulled the insights into a video exploring the main themes that had come out of those discussions that they had hosted in sort of creative workshops. So that's just to demonstrate sort of how these projects sort of empowered the communities to gather insight in ways that was most appropriate for the communities and for the skills that they had, all of which sort of landed in different ways, but were able to feed into policy teams at City Hall. So does anyone have any questions about CitizenLed before I speak about the London community story? Don't know if there's anything in the chat. Let me have a look. Is anyone on mute while Hannah? Oh,
everyone's on mute at the moment, but there's nothing in the chat at the moment.
Cool.
Sorry, Sorrel had to drop off because there was an internet problem. So I'm host for the time being, so I'll keep an eye on the chat function.
Okay, great. Thank you, Angela. So the second programme that I wanted to talk to you about was the London community story. So in contrast to CitizenLed, which was very much driven by specific research questions, the London community story, the purpose of which you can see on the screen, was to give a sort of unique insight into the lives of Londoners with a layered approach, bringing to life the complexities and the difference in views and thoughts and feelings about a certain thing within London. And we were exploring sort of different creative ways of showing the diversity and sort of complexities of London's communities. So this was very much an organic process. So in the London community story, we were guided by the stories that we were hearing from Londoners. We were not sort of asking specific research questions. We started with this thing called the conversation booth, which was essentially a perspex box that looked a bit like a telephone box that we took around to different events across London, some that we hosted at City Hall, some that we hosted in local libraries, at universities, and people could go into this box and have a free-flowing conversation. We often gave them a word or a question, like a very high-level question to get the conversation flowing. But it was very much free form, and they could discuss what they liked, and there was no sort of guide or specific questions as there were in CitizenLed. So this then left us with 16 hours of conversations which had been recorded in this booth. So we then commissioned community researchers to do some analysis of this 16 hours of conversation, and they obviously listened, transcribed, and then did a lot of text analysis. So looking at the qualitative data that had been collected through these conversations, and started to pull out key themes and pertinent detail that was coming through across from different communities and different groups, but started pulling out key themes which resonated with the community researcher. They identified 6 themes, and with this we then thought, right, these are 6 key themes, and they were very broad themes. So things like identity, equality, relationships. I think one of the themes was around digital communities. So then, as you can see on this diagram, we then commissioned some creative outputs. So I'll give you an example on the next slide of one of the themes, but we commissioned 6 videos, so 1 video per theme, 1-minute clips, and 6 written pieces. And we wanted to basically use this as a way of showing how different communities within London have very diverse views on things, and actually how do we ensure that resonates within our policy making, and how do we demonstrate that to policy teams that actually one policy, as I'm sure you all are aware of, that can't fit all, and how do we ensure that we are adapting and flexing based on what we're hearing from Londoners. So as well as, however, we are also very aware that creative outputs are not always the best way for policymakers to robustly evidence why they've made decisions. So we also commissioned our intelligence unit to do a deep dive into their data sets on data store to kind of contextualize these themes. And so we also use sort of quantitative data to evidence why, for example, equality, identity, relationships were pertinent issues that we should be thinking about and feeding into our work. So I'll show you an example. I'm hoping I'm going to be able to show you a video, but we'll see. If not, I'll post the link in the chat and you can all watch it. I'll give you a minute. But so, as I mentioned, there were 6 themes identified from the conversation booth. And essentially the one that I'm going to show you is the equality theme. So what this kind of demonstrate is so the community researcher interpreted it from listening to the transcript and then doing some qualitative data analysis. And a lot of what equality as a theme came out as initially was around people's experience of racism and how this differed across different generations, how racism enters the privacy of people's home through television, and the pressure to keep up appearances to dispel racist stereotypes. And this was kind of the types of conversations that the community researcher was exploring. This then was reflected in the video that our artistic, what do I
I think we've just lost Hannah's sound.
Yes, Hannah, we lost you there for a second. Hannah, can you still?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. You're back. You're back.
I'm back. Okay, sorry, my internet's unstable. I've just been told I've got an unstable internet. I've just posted the link in the chat, and it would be great if you could all. So the theme of equality was then interpreted by a videographer who you'll be able to watch that video on that link that I've just sent you. And then we also had a writer interpret the theme of equality, and they took it in quite a different direction and explored sort of equality across the ages, talking about older people and the impact of loneliness on older people. And then we also underpinned that, which you'll also see on that link, underpinned that with data from the London Data Store. So looking at the survey of Londoners and questions around equality, just to kind of start layering up. So obviously, I think equality it's obvious that it's layered and complex and a big subject, but actually, if you give people the voice and opportunity to interpret that in the way that they see fit, like you get a really broad range and collective mix of kind of people's views and thoughts on things. Do people want to just take 1 minute to watch the video that I've shared? Is that okay? Great. You might need to scroll down a bit. Did we see? Did everyone see the video? I'll get a few thumbs up. Yeah, so this is just and there's a whole host, so I'll show you that in a bit, but there's a whole host, so there's a page per theme on there, and there's some really interesting videos, written pieces, which I think is just one way of if you're able to do some analysis of perhaps surveys you've done, or perhaps meetings that you're hosting, and you're gathering key themes and thoughts from people you're working with. Like, this is one way of sort of demonstrating those in kind of creative outputs and showing kind of the power of like allowing people to show their own stories. So the London community story, for me, I found relatively uncomfortable because we weren't clear in our process before we started. And I know obviously the GLA probably has the luxury of being able to do these kind of test and learn projects, but I think there's key elements within there that are really interesting to explore. So just to summarize, so those two projects show very different ways of generating insights and stories from Londoners, with CitizenLed focusing on specific topics, clear research questions and surveys, and allowing sort of from those very probably quite traditional surveying techniques, then creating creative outputs from them. In contrast, London Community Story was much more free-flowing. Community researchers were commissioned to listen to these conversations and transcribe and analyse them, and these themes were then used to guide the rest of the project, which is sort of flips the citizen-led process on its head. But I suppose what they both have in common, despite their different methods of collecting the stories and the qualitative data, was that they both use sort of different ways of analysing that qualitative data to show insights and stories. So I thought that perhaps I'm going to go over to you now and see if there's any questions, and then we can go into out some kind of which perhaps is then you could use in analysing your own sort of qualitative data that you might collect in multiple different ways. So are there any questions? Have I stunned you all into silence? Okay, we'll go on to the exercise, and then you can just ask me whilst we're working on the exercise. You can just pop up in the chat and we can have a conversation. So the exercise that I wanted to test out is a qualitative data analysis technique, which my colleague, Advice Forensics, how did you set about agreeing the questions for CitizenLed? Interesting question. So essentially what we tried to do with CitizenLed, so obviously I think we funded 6 in the first year and 10 in the second year, very diverse projects with very different aims and themes that they were focusing on. And we were very keen to ensure that the groups who'd been funded guided what we wanted to ask, what they wanted to explore and what issues were pertinent to their community. However, we were also wanted to be sure that they had somewhere to land in terms of with policy teams, and that they were relevant to kind of the work that policy teams were doing. So we tried to co-produce them, and I think the word co-produce is used a lot and not necessarily always done in the way that people intend for it to be done.
And I think you're breaking up again.
Essentially, we ensured that the questions were produced like through open dialogue between the organ. Can you hear me? Is it okay?
You want to maybe disable your video? Maybe that helps a bit.
I'll keep talking. Yeah, that might be a good idea. So so we sort of brought together the group who'd been funded, the policy team who perhaps their questions would land with. So for example, with the GRT group, we work with the education and youth team. With young Europeans, we work with our social integration team who lead on participation, and to ensure that the questions that they were asking linked directly with the policy work. So they weren't asking sort of questions which perhaps the GLA, for example, don't have the remit for that type of work, or don't have the kind of, or perhaps that policy team doesn't exist. Or we wanted to make sure that what they were asking could land somewhere and could be taken forward or built into the work of specific policy teams. So we ensured that that conversation happened, and we were also really keen to ensure that we helped the organisations manage expectations in terms of not asking too many questions, so they didn't have loads of analysis to do afterwards, and being realistic in how many people they could survey at any one time. So yeah, it was kind of a joint effort, and I think some were more successful than others, as things are. Some people were ambitious and then found it really difficult with the analysis. So it was about keeping surveys shortish and also working directly with policy teams. Okay, we'll move on to this exercise, which I hope works. So my colleague from London Plus, Lucy, shared this exercise with me, which she's done before, I haven't done before, so let's see if it works. But essentially, this qualitative data analysis technique is about kind of attaching codes, and I think codes often scares people, but it's essentially just sort of summarizing what is being said within a qualitative data text, for example, and then kind of trying to pull out the codes that you've identified and accumulated into key themes. So then those key themes become the kind of key insights that you pull from a piece of text. So the method has 3 stages, and I've got an extract that I'm going to share with you. I'll post a link to the Jamboard in the chat. The first stage is that we're going to read the extract and pull out keywords. So what's the content of the extract? What are the keywords that this individual is sharing with us? Then the second order codes are what do they mean by that? So I'll give you the context of the extract, where it's from, and from that you can then interpret what the words mean within this context. And then the third code is looking back at those first 2 stages and identifying the main themes coming through the text. So we're going to give it a go. I'm going to stop sharing my PowerPoint and I'm going to share this. So what this text is from, so as I mentioned before, the London Community Response Survey started in April, and we've been asking civil society organisations about their needs throughout the pandemic. And as we were moved around July time, the London Recovery Board was set up, and this question basically asked how we can ensure that London thrive. Let me read the question. What do you think we should focus on to get London thriving again? And this organisation is a community anchor organisation, so works with a variety of different types of people, and this was their response to that question. So what I'm asking you to do, stage 1, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to do stage 1. So essentially read through the extract, and on slide 2 of the Jamboard, as you can see here, in first order code, just start pulling out keywords that you're reading and post them in a post-it note. So to do post-it note, there is this little toolbar on the side here, and you just click sticky note, and this box will pop up, and then you can just write the keyword. So as you can see, I've started one. Representation comes up a lot, so you just click save, and then your post-it note appears on the Jamboard and you can move it. So does that seem clear to everyone? So we're just going to pull out keywords. So what is the content of what this individual is saying about what London, how do we get London thriving again? So I'll just give you a couple of minutes to read through and start posting. If you're finding it hard on Jamboard, feel free to post your words in the chat and I can pull them onto Jamboard for you. But yeah, does that sound okay? And if the text is too long, read one paragraph, start in the middle, read whatever bit you'd like. Great, thanks, Joe. I'll post that. Amazing. Okay, we'll do one more minute of identifying some key words. Oh, amazing. Lots of great words coming up. Sorry, right. Okay, I'll give you, yeah, let's stop there and we'll move on to the next stage. Gosh, there's so many words, I can't even. Okay, so the next round of coding. So look, you're all coders now. The next round of coding is to now think about the context. So what's the context in which these words have been written? So if we're thinking about, so it's useful to think about this is a civil society organisation, a community anchor organisation who supports a diverse community in one of London's most sort of diverse boroughs. Also, like, think about in which these words that you've pulled situated in, and what do they mean? So what are they trying to say with the words that they're using? So as you can see, in reference to representation for the second order code, the word representation is used throughout. So So it's used in reference to young people, in reference to those disproportionately impacted, in reference to different types of organisations. So what I've said is essentially they're looking at user-led groups and participants being able to represent themselves. So this is to kind of give a bit more detail to the words that you've pulled out. So if you can post some second order codes, so this is kind of giving a bit more context to those words, which we've got in column 1. Does that make sense? Cool. So if you could use another color, maybe green for this, that would be great, just so we can see. I'll start ordering these. Capacity, voice, young people. Amazing. Is everyone finding this okay? Cool. So that's great. Thank you so much, everyone, for posting your second order code. So starting to get sort of the context behind the content in there. And we've got some really interesting things. So building capacity, communities need genuine commitment to listen from outside. So the commitment needs to be from the board rather than from communities. Inequalities are the greatest obstacle. Yeah, you could see that from the amount of people who flagged that as a key word. Written strategies need to translate into action. Should we be more ambitious than just recovering? We need to be inclusive to people need to work together. Amazing. So these are great. So now from these second order codes, the final aim of this is to get some main themes from this text. And I think as well, like thinking about these main themes, so you've kind of started to pull them out. And I suppose this would be more impactful if, say, you had done this exercise across multiple responses, because then you could start seeing the themes across different answers, and perhaps you do this main themes bit across 100 responses, so you were pulling main themes from all the answers you were getting. But if we could now look across the sort of first and second order codes and think about what are the main themes that this individual is conveying, that then also thinking about it in a way that we can then translate to action or to decision making. So like, how do we take this insight that we gathered in a way that then could enable us, so the GLA, for example, who's receiving this insight, enable us to then be proactive in responding to the concerns or the thoughts shared here. So does anybody want to start posting sort of main themes? I think one is definitely this idea around inequalities being pertinent to everything that's happening, because that's been flagged as kind of ensuring equality and inclusion. Amazing. I think as well there's stuff around collaboration and working together, and sort of equity of voice is kind of coming out. Commitment to working collaboratively, inclusion of young people. So as you started to pull out these main themes, like you can already then start thinking about, okay, so how do we do these things? So for example, inclusion of young people, I would start thinking about sharing that with the education and youth team and thinking about how perhaps they're leading on this area of work and how we ensure it's sort of embedded across across teams. I really like sort of the use of the word ensuring equality and inclusion, and that would probably, for example, at City Hall, we have a equality and fairness team, and like, how do we ensure that they are embedded across all policies being made? Looking for practical ways to involve people. I think that's a really great sort of action thing that we're doing. How do we ensure that we're engaging in and garnering people's views, and doing that collaboratively, and we're really committed to that as a key principle. So hopefully that was quite an easy task to do, and quite started to show like the possibilities and like the real insights you can get if you kind of do a bit of deeper analysis of qualitative data that you collect. And I'm sure that you all do sort of surveys, perhaps member surveys, or collect feedback from events or sessions that you run. And this is sort of a way of thinking about and sorting through what people are saying to you, and actually digging a bit deeper to get that context. So that's really great. Hopefully that has inspired you. And also now you can all say that you know how to code, which is great. Maybe on Jamboard with sticky notes, but I think it counts. That's probably the most amount of coding that I can do as well. I'm aware that we only have 5 minutes left, and I did want to just jump on to show you the London Data Store quickly. So as you can see from the main themes, there's sort of keywords and things coming out that actually it might also be useful to think about whether there's any kind of quantitative data to back up the insights that are coming out of your qualitative data gathering. And this is what we did for the London Community Story. As you will have seen on that link I shared you, there's a area around data sets, and it talks about Survey of Londoners data, annual population survey, and other data sets that we've kind of used to back up then sort of some of the key themes that have come out. So with the London Community Story, we use something called the Survey of Londoners, but there is over 939 data sets on the London Data Store, all of which, well, not all of which, they cover a wide range of different types of areas. You can search by theme. So for example, we just come up with young people being integral to like one of the key things that we pulled out of our coding. So we could then search young people, and you start to get.
And I think we've lost you.
Hello?
Yeah, you're back.
I'm back, good. So one thing, so you can search sort of young people, and you can begin to see different data about different young people. It's gone now, but there's a data set on here. Oh, here it is, Young Londoners funded projects. So these projects are about engaging young people and getting them involved. And that was kind of a main theme that came out of our text analysis. So empowering young people. So you could begin to look at kind of the money that's gone into there, and perhaps if you work in a certain area, you could look at Young Londoners funded projects within your area. The data store has data sets shared via Excel, but there's also reports on the data store. There's also, so the Survey of Londoners, for example, which we used quite a lot for our, is a report. So it's kind of got headline findings from the Survey of Londoners, which was a survey, 6,000 Londoners last summer, basically looking to explore ideas and feelings around social integration, equality, diversity and inclusion, and also economic fairness. So these are things, you can get the data tables, but you can also just pull key headlines from the fact sheet, which start a contextual picture around that thematic area. So that's just some key things that you may want to look at. And then just to finish off, because I think this is something that actually you may want to explore,
You're breaking up again, Hannah.
to be part of, We are still conducting our London Community Response Survey, which, as I mentioned, come back on and I'll just talk to you. The London Community Response Survey, we've done a weekly survey for 3 months and now it's gone to bi-monthly, but all the insights and information from that survey are on the London Data Store. And you can use them to sort of inform your own work. They've been feeding into sort of the strategic response to COVID-19. We have a cohort of over 300 organisations, so civil society organisations across London who contribute to it. And we're hoping to keep it going beyond whenever COVID finishes. We're hoping, because it's a real great resource in terms of like getting direct insight from civil society organisations. But it also, what we've heard from civil society organisations is that it allows them to contextualise the work they're doing and see it set it in kind of data and insight from others who are working in the same space. So I think it's a really great resource. As I said, the past survey results are on the London Data Store. I'll post a link here. But please do also, the presentation that I was sharing has my email address on. So if you're interested in being involved, if you have any questions about what I've given you a whistle-stop tour through, please do get in touch. My 2 colleagues' email addresses who led CitizenLed and London Community Story are also on there. So please do get in touch if you have any more questions. And just on a final note, the London Community Story 2 is being designed, and this time we're looking at those creative outputs. If you start with a creative output, how do you pull insights from those? And we're looking at kind of creating a whole program around that, because there's been lots of storytelling throughout the pandemic. So if your organization has done anything like that and you'd like to kind of be involved in like taking it a step further, please do get in touch, because we are really keen to ensure that it's kind of representative and involves various different types of people. So please do get in touch. But yeah, I will finish there. I'm sorry it was such a whistle-stop tour, but at least hopefully if you take one thing from it, is that Jamboard is really useful for virtual post-it noting. So yeah, thank you everyone.